Well, welcome to City Lights, everybody. On behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and the City Lights Foundation, I would like to welcome you to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of our events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis. And as always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone peoples, aka the San Francisco Bay Area. Tonight, we are delighted to have back in the house Stacey D'Erasmo. We've had the great pleasure of hosting her in the past for wonderful fiction. It has been many, many moons, and we are so delighted that she is back with us. On this occasion, we celebrate the publication of a new nonfiction work. The book is titled The Long Run, a creative inquiry. It's published by our friends over at Graywolf Press, one of the great indies of this country. The Long Run poses the question, how does one go about sustaining a creative life? Through a series of conversations, anecdotes, and observations, Stacey D'Erasmo explores how we can redefine artistic success while finding ourselves at the crossroads of a career. Using the examples of Valda Setterfield, Samuel R. Delany, Steve Earle, Darrel Morrison, amongst others, she generates an important guide for all of us in how we can remain alive and vital in our chosen vocation. Stacey D'Erasmo is the author of 5 novels and 1 book of fiction. Articles and podcasts of hers have been published in the New York Times Book Review, the New York Times Magazine, Plowshares, the New Yorker, the Los Angeles Times, and so on and so forth. A Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford. She is frequently a faculty member at Breadloaf Writers Conference. She is currently an associate professor of writing and publishing practices at Fordham University in New York City. Joining her tonight in conversation is none other than R.O. Kwon. She is the national bestseller author of the novel The Incendiaries. Her new novel titled Exhibit was recently published by Riverhead Books. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, amongst others. She also is no stranger to City Lights. Stacey D'Erasmo, R.O. Kwon, such a pleasure. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. It's really nice to be back at City Lights in any form, sort of beaming my particles toward you all. So one thing that Reese and I thought we might do, because we know each other. Reese was, I'm not sure that you were actually in my class, but Reese was, were you actually in my class? I don't think you were.
I was. It was that wonderful class
Oh,
you
the
took
lit class.
on literature. Yeah. So not a workshop.
Right, lit class, not the word. Anyway, so we know each other, and I'm a fan, and so I thought that that it would really be really nice for she and I to have a real back and forth conversation. I have a lot of questions I want to ask her about Exhibit, her new book. So what we're going to do to start out is we're going to each read a page from the other one's book and just say a little bit about why it struck us, moved us, resonated with us. And then we'll be talking to each other about the long run, about process, but also about other things in and around this strange path on which we find ourselves. So I'll start. I'm going to read a passage from sort of the early third of Exhibit, and the main character is a woman named Jin who she's married to a man, and she meets a woman named Lydia, a ballerina, at a party, and in the company of Lydia, she begins to really explore something she's been wanting to explore for a long time, which is BDSM, kind of BDSM practices. So in this little scene, she's going to a kind of like a BDSM gathering or party that takes place in this house. So in Hilda's house, Lydia went up a flight. She turned left, pace calm. It wasn't Lydia's first time. Uncoiling of wall wrap, she put it on the bed. I shed a thigh-length calfskin jacket. She handed me a full glass from a small table. I had a sip of club soda its froth hissing. I followed Lydia to the end of a hall. But this next part I see through a veil. In dull light, beige faces glinted. Lydia had said Hilda invited just women. I hadn't known they'd all be white. One person in ripped fishnet tights had wrists pulled high, tied to a ceiling rope. She was being hit with a long-handled whip. Cries rising a pitch, she dodged its lash. The upright figure set the whip down. She knelt by the tied person's side, talking. Both laughed. She picked up the whip again. People watched. Others chatted, quiet. Lydia spoke with a slight blonde, Hilda perhaps. I lifted the glass. I'd finished the soda, then put it down. One person, lace dress bared to its hips, was roped to a post. I felt a sharp pinch on my top lip. It was the glass. I'd bitten through it, taking a shard. I backed into the hall. Outside, I spat the fugitive shard in trash. I ran. I hit a light, noting the wind. Jacket, I thought. I'd left it at Hilda's. I'd forget it. I loved that calfskin jacket, a thrift shop find, but I'd lost it. Gone. Oh well. So I love this page because so for one thing, right, there's the kind of the beauty and the crispness of the writing, but I also love that so Jin is coming into the scene and immediately she's thinking, is this my story? No, this is my story, right? Is this my story? Is this what I imagined? These images that have been held so intensely privately, she sees enacted in the world. And at one point, a little later in the scene, she was like, "Wait, this has been here all this time?" Like, right? But at the same time, it is not as she imagined it. It's all white, which is alienating. And that kind of doubleness of, is this my scene? Is this not my scene? Which to me also resonated so much with art making itself, where it's a sex scene she's going into, but it also is analogous to kind of art making, in that you say, well, I've been holding this thing so closely. Now it's going to meet the world. And there's that weirdness of, oh, wait, is this what I thought it would be? So that's the reason that I find that passage really moving and really deeply, deeply interesting.
Thank you so much, Stacey. This is so meaningful. So yeah, I was Stacey's student when I was getting an MFA at Brooklyn College. And it was this amazing literature class where we just read books as writers. And we read any number of incredible books, but one that I remember so clearly is you introduced me to Anne Carson, who has been foundational to my life. And I was also Stacey's teaching fellow at Breadloaf at a writers' conference, which was also so meaningful. So I was so honored to be asked to be in conversation here with you. Thank you. And also I want to say, if you haven't read The Long Run yet, and if you have the means, I warmly encourage you to buy this book and to buy it tonight from City Lights. And, if you value having this community and events like this, and I very much do, bookstores need our support. It takes a lot of resources and time. And just like personally, because I published Exhibit in May, and around publication so far, I've found, I swore it wouldn't happen, but it happened again. I entered a period when I could barely write, barely read, was once again questioning what on earth I was doing. And reading this book helped me get back to writing, which is such a tremendous gift. And I know that and I think it will be life-giving for every single one of you. Okay, so I'll read the page I had in mind. It's from the prologue where Stacey sets up what led to this book. And yeah. In my own long run, one of the main things I've always reached for to sustain me is company. The company of lovers, the company of friends, the company of other writers and artists living and dead. With this book, I created a circle of elders, my own chosen ancestors in this vocation. They did not, of course, ask to be this for me or for anyone. They simply lived their lives. This book is a love letter, but it is also a demand. Maybe all love letters are demands. In any case, what seems clear to me is that I've always found it sustaining to turn to someone else and say, this is how it is for me. How is it for you? I felt that I would have better conversations with people I didn't know too well or at all, that my approach to them would be more open that way. Often the people I found who were willing to talk to me at length about such a personal and impossible question were friends of friends, people who had been neighbors, people who had worked with people I knew. Via this informal network of a few or more degrees of separation, I found the visual artist Cecilia Vicuña, the dancer Valda Setterfield, the landscape designer Darrel Morrison, the writer Samuel R. Delany, the actor Blair Brown, the painter Amy Sillman, and the musician Steve Earle. Feeling certain that no one would write me back, I cold contacted the Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Tania Léon through her website, and amazingly, she agreed to be interviewed several times. I've included scenes from my own life where and when they seemed relevant. This book is a fugitive, occasional memoir. This book itself, of course, is a desired path. It is subjective, partial, incomplete. It is not definitive. It is not an instruction manual. It is not canonical. It is a collection of glimpses, of questions, of conversations in reality and in the imagination. It's how far I've gotten. So I had trouble picking one page to read to you all, but I just really love I think this passage sets a tone of great generosity that I think really imbues the whole book. This book, I mean, sure, like every book, every piece of art, I suppose a lot of people would consider them gifts, but this really feels like something that was, Stacey talks in this book about, well, you talk in this book about how the book was forged during a time of real crisis, and years-long crisis, and out of that crisis, this book came. And yeah, so I guess maybe I'll start off with a question that to kick us off. So you've of course written magnificent fiction before, as well as a wonderful The Art of Intimacy as part of the Graywolf series, The Art of. I love the structure of The Long Run, which weaves interviews and reflections on others' art and research you did, along with glimpses into your own life. And I wonder what led to you realizing that this was the container you wanted for this particular book.
Yeah. So, I mean, I knew that I wanted to talk to artists working in different mediums, right? That I didn't want to only talk to writers, that I wanted to, and what happened actually in a way was that with all of the folks that I spoke to, they had these, these are people who were in their, mostly in their 70s and in some cases in their 80s, and the amount of material that that they had made and that was about them was like this much material. I've never had this sort of problem before where it was, I mean, any one of them, you could write like a 500-page book about them, right? So partly it was strategic and practical, and that it's like I couldn't possibly hope to be comprehensive about any of them. And also, I don't have the expertise, right? I'm not a musician. I'm not a musicologist. I don't write about, I'm not I'm not an art historian. I am an amateur, really. And so I needed to find a way to kind of hold all of these people really in conversation with one another. And then also at a certain point, I realized that I really needed to say something about myself. Otherwise, it was a little too weird. It was like a little like, hi, other people, please tell me the story of your soul. And I'll just sit over here like in a blackout hood, writing it down. And I felt like that was would be a little cold and a little strange. And I wanted to foreground my not knowing. I wanted to foreground the sense of negative capability and of kind of just like finding your way through, right? And I also knew that that I wanted the chapters to talk to each other. So that's what I wanted. I wanted this kind of I wanted a conversation that would be sort of 360 degrees and would move all around. So, but honestly, a lot of it had to do with the fact that of all the things I didn't know and of how impossible it would be to comprehensively take on any of these folks, right? It's not something that I can do. And I don't know, in terms of the container, for a long time, I don't know how contained it even felt. Do you know what I mean? I felt like it was like, I was sort of piecing together this kind of patchwork quilt and then letting resonances kind of happen. Do you know what I mean? That was very much part of what, of what I was doing.
I love that you ended with I'm not giving anything away if I say that you end with Cecilia Vicuña's work. And when you talk about an exhibition she had where there's with her textiles, how there's just like stuff woven in, and how that adds mystery. And I was thinking that because this book seems like such an act of weaving as well, and of having like these shards of lives and conversations. And I wonder, I was trying to figure out, other than your own admiration for their work, because so one of my favorite things about going to an artist residency is just hearing other artists talk about their work. And I love and I felt as though this felt like the greater than, and it reminded me of that, of just hearing people talk across disciplines, the glorious interdisciplinary learning. And how did you, other than your own admiration for their work, was there a guiding principle in terms of how you picked who you talked to from which disciplines?
Yeah. It's interestingly because consciously, no, right? I sort of would like put out feelers and look for people, and I would think, okay, this one seems like someone who would be interesting, and this one seems like someone who would be interesting. But I think that as I worked with as I got to know these folks and worked with them, actually all of these resonances among them arose. For instance, a lot of them, oh, how did this happen, turned out to be queer. Some of them that I didn't even know that they were. I really didn't until then I sort of got to know them and got to know more about their life. So it's like, oh, okay. Also, a lot of them, most of them really, occupy a position within their disciplines where they are, where they're wrestling with those disciplines. They're in, to say that they're in dialogue with those disciplines doesn't quite carry it. They're in these sort of passionate, sometimes love-hate relationships with their disciplines. So they're not they're really not good soldiers. They're a little angsty. Every single one of them is in a complex relationship with their disciplines, right? They're kind of like the you know, like the kids in school who like are really smart but don't show up to class all the time. It was a lot. It was a lot of those, and so then I begin to see, oh, okay, right. My subconscious was doing some choosing here, and it was this is who I was lighting to, right? The other thing that has to be said is that by definition, if you're talking to folks who are in their 70s, 80s, you're talking to like a World War II generation, right? Like that just happens to be like a temporal thing, which means the folks that I was talking to were young adults in the 60s, which means that their sensibilities, no matter where they were growing up in the world, but the 60s were such a time globally of a certain kind of turmoil and change. So it means all of these people, in fact, are from a certain generation, and a generation that also begins to abut actually my parents' generation. So it was kind of like there was a whole sort of like a deep dive into the generation just above me. And I think that was absolutely motivating me, right? Like, tell me how you got to be you and what that was like. And definitely tell me before you go. Like, I need to know this. But that brings up a question that I have for you, Reese, which is that, so all the main characters in Exhibit actually are artists, right? There's Jin is a photographer, her husband Philip is a filmmaker, Lydia is a dancer. And looked at through that lens, right? How do you feel that their lives as artists affect or constitute the dramatic action of the book? Like, so the book is staged as Jin is kind of figuring out, right, this sort of this erotic part of her life, but it's all in it's also in an art world and in people who are coming into their voices artistically, right? Or grappling with their voices artistically. Lydia's a dancer, but she's been injured. So I'm just wondering, how do you see those things going together?
Oh, such an interesting question. Damn, I'm reminded that y'all, if you ever have a chance to take a class with Stacey, I remember even before I got to Brooklyn College, people would, I think on the first day, people would ask, oh, do you all have a class with Stacey? And they'd say, she's so brilliant. You're going to enjoy it so much. And yeah, it's just a pleasure to be around your mind, both in your work and in this space. I think, I think I was interested in, I think especially with Jin and Lydia, I was interested in the question of what women get to want, and what we're discouraged from wanting. And so one of the first sort of like animating questions that fascinated me and frustrated me was, at some point I realized that everything I feel pushed to want, that includes being a mother of, a sister of, a wife of, a daughter of, a community member of, a friend of. So it's all mediated through that preposition. And all the things I feel pressured not to want or to hide my desire for, or if possible, kill my desire for, include, sex for sure, food, definitely ambition, artistic ambition, absolutely, even a day alone. And I just became really curious about that. Why is that? Why is it that? And it's really important to me to, I love my friends. I want to be a good friend. It's really important to me to be very involved in my communities. But what's so dangerous about me ever wanting for myself? And so I think that's part of how both Jen and Lydia, it felt important to me that they be artists, that they have something that pushes them to want to be central in their own lives in a way that especially women are discouraged, are in a way that I, at least as a woman, feel discouraged from ever wanting.
Mm-hmm. See, it's interesting you would say that, because the other thing that I noticed when I looked at who I had in the book, it's a lot of women. It's not, I don't think I have to count, it's not half and half. I think it's like 5-3, something like that. And, and so it's like, I could see that I was like steering toward them to say, so show me your life, right? Tell me of your life. Tell me how you did this. And in a way, what you're talking about now is that, like, so in nonfiction, I could just go and find the people, right? It's like, I'm going to go find some of them and I'm going to rope them into being in my book. And then also in fiction, we do the same thing where we say, like, let's take this character, right? And begin like working the narrative through this character and then see what happens, right? How do we do this? These are the things that like light up our minds, right? We're looking for them.
Yeah. And I was, well, that brings to mind, because as I was reading this book, I was thinking a lot about grad school and about who, and the writer I was then, and who's still, as far as I know, who's still writing and who might have stopped, and how I do know people who used to write and who loved it and who were very talented and who did actually stop. And I've also thought about that as a teacher too, because there's so many people who want to make art and be artists, and there are so many people who want to devote their life to this, and not everyone is able to stay with it for the rest of their lives. And that's one of the great, like, the central questions of this book is, how do you stay with it? And I guess I just wondered, what advice would you give your own younger self who is starting out?
Yeah, people, right? What would I give my my younger self who was starting out? Well, one quality that I have, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, is that I tend to be a person who thinks, I can take it. I can make it work. I can take it. I can work it around, and and I'm not a quitter, and I can take it. I think that the problem with that particular mentality, and it's a great way to be, in a way, like, if you're queer, if you're a woman, if you're like X, Y, and Z, like, you can name like a million different things, then a lot of the time you're walking into a room that is like not necessarily so happy to see you. So a kind of feeling of, I can figure this out, is good. But at the same time, there were situations, particularly, actually, work, not relationship situations as much as like work situations or different kind of scenes, where I stayed too long feeling like I could just like figure it out. One thing I would say to my younger self is, like, leave, quit. give up, right? When I was in my 20s, I went to, I actually got into a couple writing programs, but I decided to go to grad school in English Lit, which was it was immediately disastrous, immediately. On the train going down to school, I was literally crying. I didn't know why I was crying. I was just crying. And yet I stayed, and I was very unhappy. I did a master's. I was just miserable the entire time. And if I could, honestly, the advice that I would say to my younger self is, girl, get off that train. Get off the train. You don't need to, you don't need to stick it out. Many people, not all people, but many people who there is a certain kind of stubbornness involved in, if you're actually like trying to get your art into the world, you have to be pretty stubborn. And that stubbornness is certainly useful. And if you're stubborn by temperament, that's also useful. But it can also not serve you well. And I think that in a number of scenes, I would say, leave it. Leave it. Not every hill is worth dying on. That's the advice I would give myself. What advice would you give yourself? You're 2 books in now.
True. Damn, I should have an answer ready given I asked it of you. Maybe that's why I ask it, because I don't have an answer ready. Let's see. I think I would tell myself then to try to give less of a shit what other people think about me and my writing, and yeah, just to try to care less about any of it. I just think, yeah, well, that maybe ties into the next question I have. So much of, and you talk about this in your book, of course, but so much of art making requires so much vulnerability, especially the minute you start thinking about putting it out in the world. And I feel as though in so many ways I've had to shock off. It was very freeing for me at some point when the writer Catherine Chung, I remember at that point I was maybe 6 years into my first novel, and I was in one of those, yet another mini crisis of, what am I doing? How has it been 6 years? What am I doing with my life? Why didn't I become a dermatologist? I'd have been a great dermatologist. And just that's just like a question cycle I kept cycling through. And I remember reading Catherine Chung had also, her first book had taken a while. And in an interview, she said, what helped me a lot was realizing at some point that I had to be okay with other people thinking I was a loser. And I was just like, oh, that's really useful. And I think especially as I liked getting good grades when I was when I was a kid, I just thought it was fun. I liked winning, and I liked gold stars. And I think and I was teaching at Stanford this year, and I was thinking about, and I keep telling especially younger people who have the kinds of temperaments that lead you to like schools that are hard to get into, et cetera, that wanting gold stars, that can be really hard when it comes to making art, and that a lot of the time you're not going to get the gold stars you want, and that you have to find that gold inside. But yeah.
Yeah, no, obviously that's true. Actually, even worse than wanting gold stars is having a history of getting them.
Oh yeah.
Because then you're sort of like sniffing around, like, where's the star, right? One of the points that I make in the book, and that I think is also true of some of the people that I spoke with for the book, is that being queer in the time, especially in the time at which I was coming out, which was the early 80s, was a fantastic teaching that has stood me in excellent, excellent stead as a writer, because I was making an effort to go places and do things and be the kind of person that nobody wanted me to be, right? I mean, there were no gold stars in 1980 for being a dyke, like zero gold stars. And yet, that was my desire. That was what I wanted. And of course, as I like went along on that path, I found all these wonderful worlds and people and, women I wanted to be with. And so, it was like, forget, it was ingrained in me so deeply to go out to the edge of town. And I also want to say it's really, really important to say that the reason that there were people there to meet me was, of course, that there were generations that had come before me, right? So that being queer in 1980 was nowhere near as hard as being queer in 1970, 1960, 1950. By the time I came along, there was, it wasn't exactly like a full-on metropolis, but there were like a few buildings. And people had built those buildings so that I could go into them. And so it was really the best thing that ever happened to me, because it taught me that you could go toward what you wanted, that no one was going to approve of ever, which is very much what it seemed like in 1980. And I think you kind of have to you need that deep experience of that to kind of get it and hold on to it, right? So that was deeply meaningful to me. And it's also true that the vulnerability never goes away. And, I'm 7 books in at this point, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, where's the part where I don't care? Where's the part where it doesn't matter to me if anyone likes it? I don't think that ever, if you really, really don't care, then maybe you should be doing something different. I mean, but that the world is always going to give gold stars for what it's needing to give gold stars for at any particular given moment. And that experience of living outside, I've often thought that at MFA programs, what we should really teach is not here's the craft of this scene, but it's how good are you at living outside? Because that's where you're going to spend most of your time. Which also raises the question that I was thinking about with Exhibit, and that scene that I read really sparks. I was thinking, I wanted to ask you how much you see yourself as part of a queer lineage. And I mean that actually in both ways of seeing yourself. One is how do you identify yourself, right? But the other part of the question is actually, can you see yourself in the sort of going queer lineage that we have? Do you understand what I mean? Like Jin walking in and being like, okay, but they're all white,
Yeah.
right? What do you think about that?
Yeah. For an interview with the New York Times, I was coming up with a list of all the and I know I missed some, but I was coming up with a list of queer Korean writers who have published books in America. And I was trying to get to 10, and I was having trouble getting to 10. And I was just like, damn, still. But but you know, as I've been out on tour with the exhibit, a really beautiful thing has been, I think maybe in part because of what the book is interested in, a lot of people in the signing lines have come up to me and just told me things about their lives, far more so than with the first book. And so people have just come up to me and said, like, you know, especially I think Asian people have come up, any number of Asian people have come up and said, like, yeah, I'm queer, and I haven't told a soul, and if my family found out, they'd disown me. And it's just like, it's still so hard, even in this time in 2024. And I think that's something that I've thought about a lot. In Korea, it's still, and among Korean Americans too, it's still not uncommon for people to think that other people can be queer, but not us. It's just like queerness is some exotic blight that seems to afflict other people, surely not Koreans. And so yeah, there's I'm used to various ways in which I keep being told that I don't exist. And so yeah, but with that said, that the queer lineages have been so important to me. And I was thinking too, as I read this book, about how amazing and special it was, especially you know, like 15 plus years ago, 15 plus years ago, that in the MFA program, the teachers were predominantly queer. And just
That's true. That was true then. Yeah, that was true.
and the teachers were predominantly queer, and now, you know, I feel so lucky to living in San Francisco. I think maybe especially because I'm bi, pan, I don't care, either term works. And I'm married to a man, and I've written about it. And so the number of women in heterosexual appearing relationships who have said, just like, by the way, I'm also queer, but I just don't really talk about it because I'm married to a man and I don't know if I have the right, etc. And this happens so often that at this point, I straight up assume people are queer unless I'm informed otherwise. And and if they're straight, I'm gently surprised. I'm just like, oh wow, good for you, I guess. I had no idea. But so yeah, so that feels really lucky, and it still feels so endangered, of course. And with the book bans, etc., it's very clear that it's still so hard. But thinking about the teaching and thinking about what a magnificent teacher you were. I was really struck by, I love the part when Amy Sillman, she talked about how her art and her life as a teacher, how they all go together, as she called it, the expanded field of painting. And I wonder for you really were such an amazing teacher. I still have notes of things that you said in class that I wanted to hold on to forever. And I wonder, your life, with your own life as a teacher, how it informs your writing. Do you also feel that it's part of an expanded field?
Yeah. Well, Amy is an extraordinary person, and she, you know, she says a lot of really smart and wonderful things in the book. So lots of shout outs to Amy. I'm probably not quite as, quite as panoramic as Amy to see it all as like the expanded field of writing. However, one of the things in teaching that is really truly wonderful is that, most of the time, right? Truly most of the time, and Reese, you may have experienced this now because you're teaching, people come in with their stories that they're working on or whatever it is, and there's always treasure in them, like always. Sometimes to me, it looks like it's kind of like buried, or like there's like a little glint and then they like ran past it, but always there's something in there. And seeing that glint up all the time is actually really wonderful and affirming, because it reminds me that there is treasure. You just have to like not wreck it a lot of the time, right? You just have to kind of not wreck it. And so that is very good for my soul. as a writer, right? The other thing about teaching that it really is truly wonderful, especially as you get into the level where people are beginning to be like, serious about it, is being with people for whom this is everything. And it is still everything. The world is out there like blah, 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 like memeing, this meme and that meme and blah, 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 and like this thing you should buy and rah, right? And you go into these rooms and these people are sitting, usually in like fluorescent lighting and, around a seminar table, which isn't the most creatively lovely environment ever. And their hearts are absolutely on the line in all of this. And that is wonderful because this world does not always make room for that. So, so being in that fluorescent lighting with people who are as insane as you are is wonderful. I mean, it is really, really wonderful. And all of us at the end of the day are like, we have our little mangled balls of prose and we're just like trying to like dig out the treasure. I can't be reminded of that too much, right? It's very sweet that you remember me so well as a teacher, and I deeply remember all of you as students. I mean, that cohort, those years at Brooklyn College, like amazing students, many of whom have gone on to publish, and it was a wonderful place and a wonderful time to be there. And it felt like, the other thing about Brooklyn College is that folks in the Bay Area probably don't know this, but it's like, speaking of on the edge of town, it's like way out at the end of Brooklyn. You have to actually take the subway to the end, actually to the end of the line. And, so that feeling of like, we're going out to the edge of town now to find the other crazy people like us was wonderful. It was wonderful. So those things are deeply meaningful to me as a teacher. I think, I don't know are we up, Peter, are we up to the Q&A?
We can be. Do you have any more questions for each other? We could probably take one more and then from each of you, and then we can dive right in. I think people are beginning to post now. So yeah.
Okay. So Reese, I have a question for you. What sustains you and what's your kryptonite?
Ooh. What sustains me is definitely other people's art, for sure. I know that I know that my writing's doomed anytime I'm in a it happened at the start of the pandemic. It happened around the publication of both novels so far. There have been periods where I can barely read, and I'm just it's such a crisis for me every time that happens, because I'm just like, if I can barely read, I can't write. The one is fully an extension of the other. And during those times and especially it seems during those times I especially can't. I fall into periods where I can't read novels, and then so it's always very, very existentially confusing, because I'm a novelist, and during these times of deep crisis, it feels that I can't read the thing that I'm doing. Like, what is the point of what I do then? But during those times, I've been so grateful that poetry's steadfastly been there for me. During the start of the pandemic, when I could barely read, I could still read poetry still, and that was I thank God for the poets. And visual art was there for me, has been there for me. Dance has been there for me at times when I'm having trouble getting, like, when novels aren't speaking to me. And so, yeah, so I think, and yeah, that was one of the great pleasures of this book too, was, as I said, was just engaging with, sitting in the company of so many different kinds of artists. And yeah, and then in terms of kryptonite, kryptonite is, I'm on social media quite a bit. I find it, and I find it to be very often informative, useful, hilarious. I learn a lot from it. It's I just made a rule for myself yesterday that I haven't been following for a solid year because of which is no social media or news in the bedroom. And because I'd realized that, especially with I get very involved in political things too, and I was spending far too much time reading about politics, and then in that it's been barely 36 hours, and in the because of this rule, and because I'm very lazy, and I love physically lazy, and I love spending time in bed. In that time, I finished 2 books that I hadn't finished yet. Started some Wittgenstein that I've been meaning to read, and I got through like 5 different books that have been on my bedside table, and I was like, I really need to. I need to have so many more rules around social media because it's too interesting. There's too much going on, and it's too dangerous. But yeah.
Maybe many people's kryptonite, right? But that's the thing about it is that we weren't anticipating is that it would be such shiny, tasty kryptonite, right? It wouldn't like glow green. It would be like, ooh, look, cats, puppies, right? Right? They would make it really, really sweet.
Yeah. And well, okay, so I'll ask one last question of you. I wonder, it's physically such a short book, and it feels so expansive. And as you said, there was a lot you left out too. Do you think this is a project you'll continue in any shape or form?
A number of people have said that, like, like the even longer run, the the run keeps getting longer. I don't know. I mean, I see people all the time that I would love to talk to, that are, that are really interesting. It's a deep dive. So I don't know, right? The short answer is, I don't know. I don't have any plans to do that right now, but, the book could easily be twice as long. It could be 3 times as long, right? I mean, which is different than anything else I've ever done. I've never felt that before, that like, oh my God, we could just keep going. So I don't know.
So I think we're ready for some questions now.
Okay.
Let's see. So Kelly says, a Gen Xer here, I remember finding new books and music happening slowly by chance through word of mouth, through zines, at festivals, etc. Fast forward to today, and it's so fast, and there's so many voices weighing in, Bookstagram, Book Talk, etc. Does that change how you show up as an author?
Yeah, because you have to show up to all those things. I mean, if the question is, does it change how you show up, meaning the kinds of press and things that you need to do? Absolutely, right? But I think that there's another level to that question, which is like, do you experience writing your book in the same way when you know it's also being fed into social media? Do you know what I mean? And that's a metaphysical and profoundly disturbing question. And the answer is, I fear, yes, that it does. I don't know, Reese, what do you think?
Oh, I think Reese got muted. Let me see if I can. There we go.
I think something I noticed with the most recent book, because writing, I still haven't really recovered, and I'm surprised because it's almost 3 months out. It came with so much terror. I had what were sometimes daily panic attacks. And it's still happening. I can't get rid of it's like anytime I go near publicity things that I know that a panic attack is forthcoming. And so it's just, and so it's been a long practice of just sort of learning to deal with that and having to sort of fold that into my understanding of what the day will look like. And I think part of it is, the book has a lot to do with various kinds of desire, but also sexual desire is central. And I'm really like, Korean women aren't supposed to talk about sex ever. Like we're not supposed to give any indication we've ever had sex, thought about sex. All babies have been born immaculately. And I think that just the injunctions in my body are really strong and really loud. And I cannot quiet them for the life of me. I can only act despite. And I think that social media has made me even more aware of than I would be otherwise, I think, in a world without it, of just there's just so much noise. People say things to you all the time, and it is confusing. And to work, I have to be in a space where no one else really exists. When I'm writing, I'm really always writing for myself. And so I feel like it's been really important and really helpful to figure out ways in which to create that private space for myself over and over again. But yeah, it's always a struggle.
Peter, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Never get used to that. Carly asks, can you speak on how conversation with other artists affects your art practice? How does this look different across space, different types of meeting grounds and times, conversations you're in with artists you have read but not met?
Reese, do you want to start?
Sure. I think, as you clearly are too, I'm voracious about, I'm just so obsessed with how other artists work. And increasingly, I think maybe because I've spent so much of my life obsessed with literature, I'm increasingly more and more interested in spaces, in places where I don't know that much, where I loved how when you were talking with Amy Sillman, Stacey, how you were anxious about how you were talking about the art and just not knowing if and feeling, and with the music with in a scene with music too, where you were saying, I don't know the terms, like I don't know how to, I don't read music. And I think increasingly I learn so much from these spaces where I'm ignorant, where I'm still so aware of being a beginning student. And so yeah, like I think it's early days, but I think my next novel might have a lot to do with sculpting. And it's just so exciting to have this external reason to go learn so much more about sculpture than I do at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that everything that returns you to kind of beginner's mind is wonderful, right? It's fantastic. And I think especially, Carly, I love the part of your question that the conversations that you're in with artists that you haven't met yet. That's a wonderful observation, because we are, right? I mean, to take Anne Carson as an example, I met Anne Carson like once very briefly at a restaurant, and I was like so terrified of her. I admire her so much, and I think about her stuff all the time. With all due respect to Anne Carson, who I'm sure is like lovely to have dinner with, I don't want to talk to Anne Carson, right? I can't. I can talk to her work in my mind, right? In my mind. And I think that those conversations are incredibly deep and wonderful. There are writers, obviously, who are dead, that we're in deep conversation with, and it's, you know, it's very, very exciting. And I also think that, you know, a lot of times, I mean, Reese, you may have experienced this, we're in conversation with other artists, not only about how they make their art and how they do, but it's like, so how do you live? How do you live? Like, what pays the rent? Like, how do you do it? Do you have pets? Like, I think that there's a lot of like sniffing around at how people actually live, and that is incredibly important. I mean, I know that when I was interviewing a lot of these folks on Zoom because of COVID and stuff, I was completely like snooping in their background. You know, I was completely like, what's that over there? You know, kind of quietly like taking notes to say, who are you? What's it like over there? Right? And those are really important parts of the conversation.
Well, we have, alas, come to the top of the hour, but I know that in an alternate universe, there's a Stacey D'Erasmo and Kwon channel that I can turn on at the end of my day and feed my soul. Thank you both so much. This has been such a delight, really.
Thank
Such
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.